Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, nationwide protests expected on May the 1st as educators and teachers unions across the United States are encouraging a walkout over public education. We'll have all the details with Tina Descovich from Moms for Liberty coming up. And a good Friday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can listen to the program and take it with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It's real simple. Just search for the Nick Craig Show, tap the subscribe or follow button, and take a new program with you each and every weekday morning. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our show this morning is brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com or give them a call, 910-251-6088. We'll hear more from them coming up a little bit later on in the program this morning. I like to try and keep you, the audience, ahead of things that are going on, right? We talked back a couple of weeks ago about the big Virginia vote coming up this month in April, a couple of weeks from now, as it relates to redistricting. Try and keep you ahead of the news cycle, which of course is incredibly busy. There's a million things going on any given day, both across the state of North Carolina, across the nation, and of course internationally with everything that is going on right now. There is an event coming up on May the 1st across the nation and here in North Carolina that you need to be well aware of. The North Carolina Association of Educators, that is the largest teachers union in the state of North Carolina, the NCAE, is encouraging teachers to call out of work on May the 1st and go to Raleigh and protest for more public school funding. Now, this ties in with an important show that we had back just a couple of days ago talking about the Leandro lawsuit. We covered that last Friday, 1 week ago, talking about Leandro. That was a 30-plus year legal challenge here in North Carolina. And I would encourage you, if you missed last Friday's program, you need to go and take a listen to it. I'm not going to have the opportunity or the time to get into all of the pertinent details. Find last Friday's show in your favorite podcast app. You can find it on YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, all those platforms as well, or the website, nickcraig.com. But the long and the short, back in the early 90s, a couple of rural school districts were essentially suing the state of North Carolina, claiming that the legislature, which I'll note was controlled at that point by Democrats exclusively for 90 years, suing them over a lack of education funding, public education funding in a couple of rural school districts. That case has transformed and did transform pretty significantly from when it was filed in the early 90s to what it had become in more recent times. Back last week, the North Carolina Supreme Court decided to toss the case, rule that it was dead with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. And so that is a major decision by the courts, but it brings forth the larger question and discussion over public education funding. If you follow school boards and school board meetings closely, which I know most people do not, I will admit it is not the most exciting thing in the world. These meetings are very lengthy. They're very in the weeds. I completely understand for people that don't make that an integral or central portion of their lives. I totally understand it. But left-wing groups have been going to school board meetings now for years and trying to lead the conversation. We see this all over the state of North Carolina, from very small rural school districts to some of our state's largest, CMS out in Charlotte, Wake County Schools up in Raleigh. You see it in the New Hanover County school system as well, down in Wilmington. So, this is taking place all over the state of North Carolina and in large part throughout a lot of the United States, as these left-wing groups have continued to insert themselves into the public school system. And we have to go back a couple of years to really wrap our head around how we got to this point. And we'll talk with Tina Descovich, the CEO and founder of Moms for Liberty, coming up here in just a little bit. She'll join us here on the program to talk about this May the 1st protests that are taking place across the country. When COVID happened and the entire world essentially shut down. Schools closed. And at the time, right when it happened, okay, you could see some logic. We don't really know what's going on with this COVID thing. So let's temporarily shut down schools for a short period of time and then get them reopened. Well, that didn't happen, as we are well aware here in North Carolina. Democrat Governor Roy Cooper kept schools closed for longer than most other places across the nation. And with that, you encountered a significant amount of learning loss, and more importantly, parents seeing what was going on in the classroom as their children were sitting at the island in the kitchen or the dining room table for months on end doing school. I'll put that in air quotes because we know how inefficient, ineffective the virtual learning was. As they were, quote unquote, doing school, parents started hearing what was going on. Parents, for the first time in a long time, were essentially sitting in the classroom. Many of the families and parents also working from home as many businesses went remote. So parents were hearing what was going on. This was not being relayed by their children. They were able to listen to what was being taught straight from the horse's mouth. And that got a lot of parents very fired up. They started hearing about this radical left-wing indoctrination that was taking place within their children's classroom, and it wasn't secondhand information. It wasn't secondhand knowledge. No, this was straight from the education itself, straight from the curriculum, straight from the coursework that was being given to their children. And so you had parents that were seeing and hearing this stuff in real time and got pretty frustrated, pretty aggravated, pretty annoyed with what they were hearing. And it makes total sense. They don't want their children to be indoctrinated in public education. They want their children to become useful members of society. They want their children to be able to read, write, and do math. That's what they're looking for. That is what the promise is of the public education system, providing a basic, sound education, which is what our state constitution requires. And so, great comment coming in. COVID was a blessing and a curse. Parents found out a lot. Absolutely. There's no better way to put that. Obviously, a lot of very damaging, very disastrous things during COVID that were very bad. But the positive, the blessing side of it is that parents and families got to see what was really going on. And so since that period of time in late 2020, early 2021, you have seen school board meetings across the United States become hot topics and hot political beds across the nation. We see that here in North Carolina. And so now that parents that don't have this same left-wing liberal ideology are now involved in their children's education, they're going to school board meetings, they're speaking out. They're standing up when the North Carolina legislature back in 2023 passes the Parents' Bill of Rights, making sure that families of public school students in North Carolina have the right to see what is going on in their children's classroom, to see what curriculum is being taught. We have seen this explosion of this political hotbed as it relates to education. And so these left-wing groups, at least in some respects now, have been exposed. The gig is up. Everybody knows what's going on now. It's no longer a secret. It's no longer hidden within the public school system for families not to see. As parents are working throughout the day, they are not literally sitting in their children's classroom every single day. That's what had been going on in the past. Parents are more involved. State lawmakers, like we see here in North Carolina with the General Assembly, they are more involved in the process in bringing transparency to the public education system. The North Carolina Association of Educators and all of these other left-wing groups hate, and I use that word very clearly, hate that parents and other individuals are involved in the education system. They hate that that is taking place. They don't want transparency. They don't want you as a parent to know what is going on in the classroom with your child. The gig is up. They have been exposed. And so you've seen these groups on the left ratchet up this pressure as they continue to get called out. They fight against things like the Parents' Bill of Rights. They believe that it is appropriate for your children to be reading graphic sexual content within the public school system. They believe that as a school system, they have the right to hide pertinent information about your child from you. That's what these groups advocate for. This is what these groups fight for. It is completely ridiculous and completely inappropriate. And so these groups, I believe, are these left-wing groups are starting to get very, very agitated, as they have been for quite some time with what's going on. Turning our attention back to this protest that is scheduled on May the 1st, as I mentioned, the North Carolina Association of Educators is encouraging teachers, this is directly from a News and Observer article, is encouraging teachers to call out of work on May the 1st for a mass protest in Raleigh to protest more funding for public schools. The NCAE is telling teachers that they need to come to Raleigh during school hours on May the 1st to, quote, take back control of public dollars, hold politicians accountable to families instead of donors, and finally put our kids first, end quote. They don't believe that. They don't want kids to be put first. That's the biggest load of garbage I've ever heard. The NCAE and these other groups are mortified that the General Assembly passed Senate Bill 49, the Parents' Bill of Rights, which simply states that curriculum and learning material and all of that stuff needs to be accessible by families. They despise that. They don't want parents looking behind the curtain. They don't want it exposed that they have used the public education system as an indoctrination tool for decades. And so now they're lashing out, and a so-called education union who is talking about putting the kids first. Let's just compare and contrast this. You want to put the kids first by calling out of school and causing schools to close. That's what they're advocating for. May the 1st is not a weekend. In case you weren't familiar with the calendar, May the 1st is a Friday. That is a day in which teachers are expected, as employees of the public school system, to be in classrooms educating children. That's what their job is. That's what they're paid for. The NCAE, who wants to, quote unquote, put our kids first, directly from their press release, is encouraging teachers across the state of North Carolina to literally walk out on your children. To walk out of the classroom, call in sick. If enough of them do that, the schools will close. And we've seen this before. May 16th, 2018 and May the 1st, 2019. Marches that took place across the state caused many school districts to close because they did not have enough staff in the building for it to be safe to supervise students. The NCAE FAQ for the May the 1st march says, quote, we have reached the conclusion that it is time to take the issue to our legislative bosses, we the people, in order to make the general public understand the moral disgrace of failing to put our kids first, and ultimately with the aim of changing the composition of the legislature itself. NCAE says that the May the 1st march in Raleigh is part of a national coordinated effort of no school, no work, and no shopping to coincide with International Workers' Day, also known as May Day, which of course is a communist holiday. This is what they're doing. This is how they have surrounded themselves. You've got a teachers union that is actively encouraging their employees to not show up to work, akin to a strike, which, by the way, is illegal in North Carolina. I bring you North Carolina General Statute 95-98.1. Strikes by public employees prohibited. Reading directly from General Statute. Strikes by public employees are hereby declared illegal and against the public policy of this state. No person holding a position either full or part-time by appointment or employment with the state of North Carolina or in any county, city, town, or other political subdivision of the state of North Carolina or any agency of any of them shall willfully participate in a strike by public employees. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a strike. And the definition goes on in general statute. The word strike, as used herein, shall mean a cessation or deliberate slowing down of work by a combination of persons as a means of enforcing compliance with the demand upon the employer, but shall not include any protected activities under Article 16 of this chapter, provided, however, that nothing herein shall be limited or impair the right of any public employee to express or communicate a complaint or opinion of any matter related to the conditions of public employment, so long as the same is not designated to and does not interfere with the full, faithful, and proper performance of the duties of the employee. So the general statute is very clear. It doesn't say you can't complain about your job. That's not what it says at all. It says that you can't strike. And encouraging teachers, which the NCAE is doing, to call out of work, to shut down public schools across the state of North Carolina is absolutely a strike. Now, of course, they won't call it that because they know that they can't. So they will go and they will use whatever sort of other words or phrases to describe this protest, this walkout, because they can't call it a strike. The NCAE lists a list of frequently asked questions explaining the reason for the march was first reported by Carolina Journal. Great work by the folks over at CJ. In an opinion piece in the Carolina Journal, Terry Stoops said ordinary North Carolinians will bear the burden if schools have to close on May the 1st, with him saying in the piece over at carolinajournal.com, when unanticipated cancellation occurs, working parents must scramble to make arrangements for childcare, students are deprived of a day of learning, and districts' hourly workers are robbed of a day's wage, said Stoops, who is the director of state affairs for a group called Defending Education. But Tamika Walker-Kelly, the president of the North Carolina Association of Educators, said that North Carolina parents are already burdened by problems, such as having substitute teachers cover their children's class because the state does not provide enough money to pay teachers. Kelly said that the need for the rally is especially important now since the North Carolina Supreme Court dismissed the 32-year-old Leandro school funding lawsuit last week. Now, here's another very important fact that you always hear these left-wing groups leave out. And I will bring you the same chart I brought you last week when we talked about the Leandro suit. Here is a bar graph from 2007 to 2024 showing education spending and funding in North Carolina. Funding has increased from $7.65 billion in the 2009-2010 school year. That's where the number was at. To now, more than $12.35 billion in the 23-24 school year. We have seen an increase from $7.6 billion to $12.3 billion in the span of less than 15 years. Now, you can argue that maybe this is not enough. And we'll ask Tina Descovich about this coming up in just a couple of minutes. You could argue that more needs to be spent. Absolutely. I'm off. That's a legitimate political debate, and we should have legitimate political debate. But you can't say that the state government is depriving students and families across the state of North Carolina from education funding. Nearly half of the state's entire budget goes to education. Between K-12, the community college system, and the UNC system. It is literally almost half of the state's budget. So you can't say that the state is not spending money on schools. You can't claim that the state is depriving students of education. If you can't effectively use almost $12.5 billion to teach students within the public school system, we have got a much larger problem that we need to discuss. That is an insane amount of money to spend and still claim, oh, you're barely scratching the surface. So what do we need to spend? 25, 35? Hell, let's just spend the entire state budget on education, right? We'll just not fund anything. No more state highway patrol, no more DOT, no more DHHS, nothing. Let's just get rid of all of it. We'll spend 100% of the state budget on public education. And you guarantee that if that was the case, it still wouldn't be enough because it's never enough with these groups. It's always more and more and more and more because they're Democrats, and that's how Democrats operate. There's never enough money, and the solution to every single problem that has ever existed is to spend more. That is what we see. That is what these groups advocate for. Putting the kids first by calling out of school, shutting down learning all across the state of North Carolina so you can go stand up in Raleigh like a complete jackass and bitch about the legislature. That's it. That's what's going on with the political left. We'll catch up with Tina Descovich, the CEO and founder of Moms for Liberty, a very popular education advocacy group across the United States. She'll join us coming up here in just a couple of minutes as the Nick Craig Show continues. Before that, I want to tell you about the law group here in Wilmington and remind you that when legal challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the law group. Since 2003, Melissa Gott and her team of experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of our state. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong defense, no matter the issue, the law group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures that your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Great news, ladies and gentlemen. The law group is not some big national law firm. They're located right here in Wilmington, and they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088, or you can visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088 or online at lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group, experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate the Law Group and their continued support of the Nick Craig Show. Quick break. Tina Descovich joins us coming up after this as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live this Friday morning, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. coming up on May the 1st, we are expecting mass protests across the United States as it relates to public education. To walk us through what we can expect here coming up in just a couple of weeks, it is my pleasure to welcome back to the Nick Craig Show the CEO and founder of Moms for Liberty, Tina Descovich. Tina, no surprise here that left-wing activists are getting once again involved in our public education system. What are you keeping an eye on for this May the 1st date?
I think America should be shocked once again that teachers' unions and radical activists are using our schoolhouses, where we're supposed to be teaching reading and writing and math to our children, is being taken over for political ideologies and activism.
You know, it's pretty interesting when you look at the quote unquote big ticket issues that left-wing groups are so upset about, men and women's sports, quote unquote banning books. Tina, you look at any of these issues, they poll as 80-20 issues. The vast majority of the American public does not want to see biological men participating in women's sports. They don't want their children reading pornography in the classroom, yet Democrats seem willing to literally die on this hill. It's bizarre.
It is bizarre, but what's frustrating is they have this coordinated, well-funded effort across the country. They're using they're targeting our schools to stage a lot of these protests and rallies. And you know why they're doing this? Because it's going to bring the press, and they're getting the children involved, and they're going to have all attention. They're going to have the media cycle for about 48 hours. It's going to look like so many people in our country, including our youth, want to have boys and girls sports and want to, align with them and all their radical ideologies. But it's just not true. They've just gotten very effective at staging these things in a way that make it look like a majority of America is on their side when it's just not true.
When you mentioned one of the larger groups, and it's obviously a correlation of groups here, it's a lot of these teachers unions, whether we're talking about national teachers union groups or statewide entities, they seem to be the one leading the charges in a lot of the states, at least from what I've been reading.
The teachers unions left education a long time ago. I'd say at least for the past 5 to 10 years, you can look at their summer conference agendas and you can see that they're fighting for everything but a quality education. They have things like abortion on there and international policy and the Middle East and anything you can think of, but you never see anything about the failing reading scores and how only a third of American fourth graders can read on grade level, and how we have the lowest math scores in this country that we've ever existed. And, how we're reducing standards through advanced placement testing and the College Board, everything is just going downhill in education, and they're focusing on everything but that.
And you go back just a couple of years, you go back to the beginning parts of early 2020, COVID-19, schools shut down. Many of them closed for well over a year. The learning loss, Tina, well documented. Anybody that argues that there was not an incredible amount of learning loss has just got their head buried in the sand. You would hope to try and build that back up, to try and get back to some of those higher proficiency levels. We'd be back to focusing on basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, but it doesn't seem like that's what these groups are interested in at all.
I just don't even, it's almost embarrassing to look at people like Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle, and they lead the two nation's largest teachers unions. I'm embarrassed for them. With a failing education system, you've got Randy out in the streets for all these No Kings protests, screaming her head off, looking angry and miserable. And I just think, it's embarrassing. Go do something productive to improve education in America, or even improve teachers' working conditions. I'll even take that at this point. But standing on the street screaming about kings it's ignorant at best.
Yeah, no question about the ignorance argument there. A lot of this, I'm sure, will transition into, at least we were seeing a lot of this in North Carolina, is, Tina, the reason that all these school scores are down, the reason that proficiency is so low, unfortunately, for so many of our students, is because there's not enough money in public education. When you question many of these individuals and ask them, well, how much money do you need? They don't really ever seem to have a good answer to that question either.
Oh, I know the answer to that. Their fair share. We've heard exactly that number of their fair share. It's a way of keep moving the target too. That someone on X today was trolling me too. And it's because teachers are so underpaid. That's why kids can't read. And we were talking about Fairfax County, Virginia at the time. And so I just went and Googled real quick and saw that they're paid on average $70,000 a year, which is 30% higher than, other teachers, even in different areas. It's never enough. It's never good enough. When I served on the school board, I had the teachers unions. I had almost 1,000 teachers in my building when I was chairing the school board, protesting in their Red for Ed shirts, chanting Red for Ed, Red for Ed, because they wanted a 9% raise, I think, over the 4% we were offering. And I'm like, what industry gives you a 9% raise anywhere? And they were dead set that they needed that 9% raise to exist. And they came after me hard because I wasn't supporting it in that amount.
Tina, the much larger issue here, of course, is indoctrination within the public education system. To the credit of the Democrats, and I'll give them credit where it is due, they have done a masterful job over the last 40 to 60 years, really turning these public education systems throughout the United States into useful tools to raising the next generation of progressives. It seems like there is a little bit of a crack in that. I think a lot of that goes back to COVID as well, with parents being able to see truly what their children were learning as remote learning was taking place all across the country. They seem like maybe they're a little bit on the back foot here, scared that some of this has been exposed across the country.
They don't seem to be slowing down a bit. I will go ahead and give some credit to our organization, Moms for Liberty. You know, we launched in 21 and came out the gate swinging on these things. And parents were bringing us, I mean, that first year alone, the Black Lives Matters in school curriculum that was being taught across the country, which was just radical ideologies. Their 13 tenets of wanting to destroy the family, the nuclear family, Western civilization, which they don't hide at all. It's out there and out front. And so we've been working hard to expose it. And I remember doing an interview right here in the office. CNN came here and the lady sat right in front of us and said, you're saying there's critical race theory in schools, but you have no proof. And I said, we absolutely have proof. And I was like, we have someone that just last week got up at her school board meeting in Mecklenburg schools there and read directly from the critical race theory assignment. And so it's everywhere. And she's like, well, that's not really critical race theory. It's not really in schools. Like, she just kept telling us it's not there. You can't prove it. And I'm like, well, here's another example. And here's another example. And so they fought so hard for year after year to say we were making things up, we were crazy, but parents just kept bringing the receipts again and again. And, finally they're starting to listen. I think other parents are starting to wake up, but they're not slowing down. They're not stopping.
Tina, you bring that point up in that time right after COVID where parents got hyper involved, and we're still fortunately seeing that. It is a good thing when parents, and the circumstances may be unfortunate, but it is a good thing when parents are showing up to school boards, when they are actively involved in their child's education. Any education study you look at shows that causes a student to be a better learner when they're involved with it as an entire family. That trend continues to grow. And I think you can look at a group like Moms for Liberty and continuing to push a lot of that forward.
Yeah, everyone admits, even teachers and teachers unions admit that the number one indicator of student success is how involved your parents are. And so the fact that the schools and union and districts have been pushing parents out, especially since 2020, and not allowing them back in the schools in any meaningful way, it just goes to show you where their priorities are. It's not student success.
Let's go back to this May 1 protest that we are following, expected to take place all across the United States. Tina, I know that you've been doing a lot of research on this. What exactly is the goal? What is the objective? Are we just yelling and screaming about education? Is there something specific that we're looking to target here when these groups protest and attempt to shut down learning all across the United States?
I think there's the speculative answer, right? There's the smart aleck answer. There's all kind of answers I can give here, but I think we have to ask more questions. Like, why are these being focused around schools in many places? Why are they suggesting having the rally right outside schools grounds and then having students and staff walk in to make more of a scene, more of a show, get more media on it? I think what they're trying to do, in my opinion, is get media attention that makes them look like they are way more popular in their ideas than they actually are, to help persuade elections, to help persuade negativity towards the current administration. It's all very political, which is the core of the problem. It's political and it's staged in front of schools and taking part in schools.
And of course, the irony in all of this is the same individuals screaming, "We don't want politics in education," are the same ones, as you note, that are hosting these protests and encouraging students to literally walk out of class and engage. Tina, Moms for Liberty has got a bunch of initiatives that you guys are pushing across the United States right now. Tell us where folks can get involved with some of those details.
go to our website at momsforliberty.org. We have so many things we're working on right now. Technology and AI in education is an emerging issue that really has to be addressed. And we're the leaders in the nation on that right now, with model policies that you can look at and help bring to your school board to protect children. So we encourage you to go to momsforliberty.org or visit us on any of our social sites at moms4liberty.
Great information this morning from Tina Descovich, the CEO and founder of Moms for Liberty. Greatly appreciate her insight in highlighting this situation, these series of events that are taking place coming up here in early May. As we continue the conversation on these May the 1st protests and the impacts across the state of North Carolina. Again, I'm reading from a News and Observer article that ran this week about it, and the subheading is "Protests Would Come on a School Day." The article reads, NCAE officials distanced itself from protests earlier this year on November the 7th and January the 7th when some teachers called out of work to lobby for more state funding. But NCAE is using the organization's influence to bring people May the 1st to the Halifax Mall, which is right by the legislative building in Raleigh. NCAE wants teachers in Raleigh by 11 a.m. for events that run until 3 p.m., which would last much of the school day. May the 1st is a teacher workday for traditional schools in Wake County, where Raleigh is located. So that teacher workday means that students aren't there. But many and most schools across the state, as well as year-round schools in Wake County, are in session on Friday. The NCAE memo includes a section answering the question, quote, "Won't we be hurting our students by not being in the classroom?" That is in the FAQ for this event, which is a fair question because, we're apparently all about the kids. We're all about education. We're all about this. We're all about that. And here is how the North Carolina Association of Educators responds to this very fair question. The way we hurt our kids is by doing nothing and failing to stand up for what is right. What a ridiculous excuse. So when pressed on the issue, hey, by the way, you're talking about hurting kids. You're literally encouraging schools across the state of North Carolina to shut down so you can run around Raleigh and protest. And the response is, well, we hurt our kids more by doing nothing. We hurt our kids more by just sitting there and doing nothing. Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. The memo continues. Our hearts are with our students and in our classrooms. But when the very idea of strong public schools is under attack and our kids' future of growing up in a democracy is in jeopardy, it is our professional obligation and moral responsibility to fight for our kids. If you weren't already of the opinion, and hopefully you were, but if you weren't already of the opinion that the North Carolina Association of Educators, NCAE, was not a radical, far left group, hopefully that little memo brings the issue home. Our kids' future of growing up in a democracy is in jeopardy. What does that mean? Can anybody tell me what that means? Can you shine some light, give me some wisdom on what that means? Or is it the same Democrat talking point that we've heard from national Democrat groups for the last decade, that Republicans are a threat to democracy? Our democracy is in jeopardy because Republicans are in charge. Let's make sure we understand how we got to this position. As I mentioned a little bit ago when we were talking to Tina Descovich, Democrats are on the side of inappropriate content in the classrooms. They are on the side of biological men destroying women's sports, completely obliterating Title IX. That is what Democrats stand for. They are on the losing side of these 80-20, 90-10 issues consistently. The vast majority of the American public disagrees with those statements. That's why they're called 80-20 issues, meaning 80% of people agree, 20% disagree. And the Democrats are on the 20% disagree side, the absolute wrong side of history on these issues. But they continue. They double, they triple, they quadruple down on this stuff. And it's illogical because nobody's in favor of it. Nobody supports it. Nobody is cheering this stuff on. But they want you to believe, and Tina highlighted this very well, that they're going to use their media attention that they're going to get undoubtedly because they're going to shut down a bunch of schools, use their media attention to try and convey to the American public that there's a large majority of people that think it's okay for a dude to participate in girls' sports. They're going to try and gin up that it is okay to teach your children and depict very graphic sexual imagery in very young grades within the public school system. Right? We're not talking about sex ed. We're not talking about biology. No. We're talking about these very disgusting books that are in elementary school classrooms all across the United States. Nobody wants their children reading about this stuff in 3rd or 4th grade. That's insane. It's not appropriate by any stretch of the imagination, but they continue. This is the hill that they are willing to die on. And it is just totally illogical. And it gets back to the point of why is the quote unquote democracy in jeopardy? Because Democrats can't win. They continually lose on these issues. Republicans are in the majority here with a common sense approach of, hey, we really shouldn't be using the public education system to try and beat a political ideology into a student's head. We shouldn't be teaching about oppressors or people that are oppressed inherently based on things like their skin color or their gender that they can't change. We shouldn't be hiding the fact that your child is going by a different gender within the school system. This is the stuff that the Democrats want to protect. They think it's okay for a guidance counselor or a school nurse or somebody else within the school system to not provide critical information about their children's health, whether physical or mental, to their parents. The school is not responsible for a child's upbringing. That is the parent's responsibility. Now, yes, does the school play a role as it relates to education? Absolutely. But it's education that they play a role in. When you enroll your child in a public school, you are not writing away your rights to raise your child. And if something is going on with your kid, you should know about it. But we've seen in school district after school district after school district, students going by different names, different genders, pretending that their gender has changed. The school is willing this stuff on. Teachers are providing different clothes for kids to change into when they get to school so they can pretend to be a girl or pretend to be a boy. And the parents have no clue because they are the ones that want to reinforce this behavior, the public school system. That's what they want. That's how you grow the next generation of these radical, out of control progressives. It's not the place of the school system. It's just not. And so if, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, with over $12 billion a year in education funding across North Carolina, we should be able to teach our children how to read, how to write, and how to do math. But unfortunately, proficiency scores do not show that. Standardized testing does not show that. When you look at I think it's 4th and 7th grade is where they do the kind of national testing and averages and standards. It's abysmal, as Tina noted. We've got horrific proficiency scores across the United States and here in North Carolina. You would assume that the North Carolina Association of Educators would be laser focused on that and only that. We've got 1 in 3 students that can read at grade level. If I'm the head of the Association of Educators, I am putting every bit of my existence into improving those numbers. But they're not. They're worried about the democracy, quote unquote, being in jeopardy, the destruction of our democracy. That's their main focus. And so as we approach this May the 1st date in which the NCAE has encouraged education to essentially grind to a halt across the state of North Carolina so they can stand up in Raleigh and complain to lawmakers that they're not spending enough on public education, remember where these groups stand. Remember where they stand for. There's a reason that families are looking at private schools and charter schools and taking advantage of the Opportunity Scholarship Program. It's because the public education system is failing thousands of families across the state of North Carolina, and they are looking for an alternative. They want their children to be competent individuals. And the way to do that for many individuals now is to pull out of the public school system. Democrats hate to see that. Democrats do not want that to take place because then they lose their indoctrination ability. They lose all of the leverage they have to use the public school system, which, by the way, you and I pay for, to use that as a very beneficial tool for them. So I'm sure over the next couple of days, you'll hear more and more about these protests taking place. We'll, of course, keep an eye on it as well. And I guess coming up here in, 3 weeks, we'll bring you the latest as it unfolds right here on the Nick Craig Show. Well, it is a busy weekend across southeastern North Carolina. The Azalea Fest, the 2026 North Carolina Azalea Fest is here. A lot of great events happening over the next couple of days. Looking at the calendar here from WECT, the always fun Arlie Luncheon Garden Party taking place today. The Queen's Dance happening tonight. The Street Fair opens in downtown Wilmington at 6 o'clock. The parade tomorrow morning on Saturday, 9:30. A couple of other events throughout the day, Saturday and Sunday as well. The weather, I was just looking at the weather from WECT before we jumped on the air. It looks absolutely beautiful as we head into this weekend. Temperatures today in the middle 70s, no chance of rain. Tomorrow, low 80s, sunny, warm. Sunday, same thing, high 70s. No chance of rain at all. It is going to be, at least from a weather standpoint, looks to be one of the most beautiful Azalea Fest weekends across southeastern North Carolina that we've seen over the last couple of years. I've been to very cold garden party and Azalea Fest events. I've been to very hot. We seem to be right in the slot here as it relates to temperature. No chance of any rain again over the weekend. So a lot of phenomenal events taking place. Hopefully you'll have the opportunity and the chance to get out to some of them. I'll throw a link to the full calendar in the show notes. You can also find that over at the WECT website, the headline over there. North Carolina Azalea Festival events continue today. Make sure you get out to a couple of those events throughout the weekend. The weather is set to be absolutely gorgeous. Well, that is going to do it for a Friday edition of the Nick Craig Show. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. The Nick Craig Show streams live weekday mornings, 7 a.m., YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook. It's also available 24/7 in your favorite podcast app and is heard weeknights, 9 to 10 p.m. on WBT Radio in Charlotte. Have a phenomenal Azalea Fest weekend. We're back with you Monday morning right here on the Nick Craig Show.